Coming up on Avant Technology Insights with Ken Presti.
They're looking at, high degrees of automation. They're looking at number two, cloud acceleration. They're looking now at security and governance and risk and compliance and continuity.
How are the dynamics of technology changing in the midst of COVID-19 and all the other disruptions happening in the world today? We all dashed from the office to the home, and many companies are willing to forego a return to the office for the immediate future. What do we need to think about now that the necessary knee-jerk reaction is behind us? We'll take a look at that right after this. Welcome to Avant Technology Insights. I'm your host, Ken Presti, Research Vice President of Avant Research and Analytics. The link between solving business challenges and cutting-edge technologies has become tighter and more complex than ever before. In this podcast series from Avant Research and Analytics, we help enterprise decision makers sort through the business case, the value, the challenges, and ultimately the bottom line of technology adoption. So listen to us at your desktop, take us in the car, tune in from the commuter train, or download us at the gate. You'll find us on Apple, Spotify, and Google, as well as at www.goavant.net/podcast. My guest today has 26 years of involvement in technology sales strategies ranging from hardware to the security and professional services automation software space. He's now an industry analyst with a major market research firm that analyzes how technologies are bought and sold. He is often sought out for keynotes, consulting, thought leadership, and industry guidance. He is the principal analyst for channels, partnerships, and ecosystems at Forrester. I want to welcome Jay McBain. Jay McBain, thank you very much for joining us today. We've known each other for quite a while now. I know that your role at Forrester, you've told me before that you wake up in the morning thinking about indirect sales. And in the context of that, your role is something along the lines of a futurist in some ways. Let's start by looking at the current times we live in the midst of COVID and all the things that are going on in the world these days, and how those times are affecting the tech industry and how they're different from the pre-COVID world that led up to all this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. And I actually posted, I think, a tweet the other day where the times we're living in, future historians will build a career around.
Yeah, I can
There's
see
more
that.
change in the channel, in the technology industry, and then in the broader indirect sales world in the last 18 months than we've seen in the last 39 years. So really, really large changes before COVID. And then COVID has accelerated a lot of those changes where we're starting to imagine a new future of work. We're starting to really see through the lens of what future, channels and partnerships and vendors and now ecosystems are going to really drive.
So we looked at all this from the context of all of a sudden everyone went into a work from home kind of environment. And we've settled into that a little bit more. And we've seen companies talking about, some of the big ones talking about, we don't want to see anybody in the office for about a year, given all the things that are going along with this. What are you seeing as the fundamental challenges that we're facing in terms of perpetuating this across the long haul and getting used to it and getting the technology up to speed with this new mode of doing business?
Yeah, for the channel, this presents a really large opportunity. If I look back again across 3 or 4 decades, every time there's a major shift in topology, there is where there's mystery, there's margin, and channel partners figure out business models and ways to deliver technology, services, support, software, hardware, in a way that is, very fruitful. So, we went through client server, which, for example, managed services was created around the client server topology. We then moved into a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud topology. Many partners are, making a lot of money now around infrastructure and platforms and SaaS and other parts of the cloud stack. And this third COVID-driven topology is really a remote or edge topology. And so we knew back in March where 72% of partners reported gains or high growth in terms of their business, getting everyone at home with a notebook and with the appropriate software like UCAS, for example, and other things to make all this work. Well, now we're into the second phase of COVID, and customers, do have a large percentage of their people at home. They're starting to ask for different things. They're looking at, high degrees of automation and how that's going to play out. They're looking at number two, cloud acceleration. We've seen, Azure and AWS and Google grow in the 40% range. Azure was actually 47 during COVID, while other categories are down by 16 or 17. That's a huge difference. Number three, they're looking now at security and governance and risk and compliance and continuity. So guess what? You've got people at home. In many cases, they're on consumer style notebooks, going through a consumer network, through a consumer router that they share with their neighbor, at the front, in the front yard. And they're looking to get access to enterprise class systems and data. And now this opportunity is to go and lock down this topology and make it a managed service, make it a recurring service that they can offer to these companies in this new remote topology. So really interesting things at play.
From the standpoint of the enterprise decision maker looking at the security space, that world has now completely changed because, we've always had a little bit to deal with in terms of, employees bringing their own devices. The BYOD situation is nothing new. But now, to a certain extent, it's not only BYOD, they're bringing their own network because that last 20 feet or 50 feet, what have you, is going to be on their home networks at home. And how can the enterprise leader make sure that that security is properly in place, especially when they really don't own the infrastructure from end to end?
Yeah, so security and MSPs and agents and sub-agents know this. It's not a product. It's not a SKU. There's actually not one security company that checks off all the boxes. Security is a stack. And when you look at it, there is edge or device security, there's physical security. In a work environment, you're putting together badges and access and other things. Well, at a home, there's a whole new threat vectors around physical security. There's data security, there's application security, there's web security, there's network security. So there's about 7 layers of the cake that your partner will have to build around that company. And given this remote topology, there's going to be many, many more companies that outsource that because of those complexities and the ability, to roll a truck if necessary to lock down an environment and to handle all of these permutations that are out there. So it's a huge opportunity. And again, we're just in the first or second inning here in terms of what that's going to play out as.
Let me ask you about the physical security part, because I was thinking that the physical security aspect, for people working at home was actually a little bit simpler because you didn't have people, necessarily walking by, at least not in the same way. I mean, it's your family. Are you thinking mostly in terms of like, the kids coming and playing video games on your work computer and that sort of thing?
There's a bunch of elements. And as we know in security, for example, over 50% of the threat is actually employee based. People
Hmm.
that are well-meaning people that, when your cat is sitting on your keyboard and your kids are getting homeschooled behind you, it's a different environment. You're in a different mindset. You might be sitting in your kitchen. So like a phishing type of thing in an email, you're more apt to click on one of those links that you think might be coming from your bank
Hmm.
because you're not sitting in your cubicle, and where you were in your office is where you took your security training, and you've got a certain mindset, I think, when you sit there, and some muscle memory built around security. Well, at home everything kind of opens up, and everything is more consumer based around the home. So there's a whole element of education and training that comes around new environments and making sure that muscle memory is built. But on the physical side, if I just walk down my street and looking at the Wi-Fi routers, most of them are protected by pretty simple passwords. And, if I just lined up home phone numbers or cell phone numbers, that guesses over 50% of the passwords. If I wanted to actually go and the cable modem, the actual cable that runs to the street, on the side of the house, it's exposed. So I could go tap that and split it. physically on the side of the house without breaking in. And now I'm watching the bits and bytes, which are, in most cases not encrypted. So there's all kinds of things. And, if it's a keyboard logger, if it's all, things that we would have never thought about in a corporate, environment that's in a locked in network and obviously has physical controls around office buildings and different plants and things that have been set up.
So you mentioned a moment ago that, security is a stack, and I certainly agree with that, and that nobody really takes on that whole stack from one end to the other. With that as a given, what's the answer to this sort of an environment? What can you do, recognizing that nothing can ever really guarantee security? You at least want to maximize your odds. What would you say would be the best practices around that?
Well, the first, it's always customer first. Every customer in every industry of every size, of every type of buyer in every geography, there's about five vectors there that, make a customer unique. And mapping out this remote topology is a consulting engagement, but it's a pre-sales engagement for the channel. In the way that you would do in the past, you'd walk in and do a network assessment would be your, kind of key to show what you're dealing with and show gaps in the different areas of the business. Well, now this remote topology and this actual visualization of what it looks like will then expose. And once you start asking the questions around these layers of security and compliance and continuity and risk and governance and all these other, really important questions, customers are telling us by the hundreds of thousands in surveys that, in phase 2 of COVID, they want to have these conversations and they want to have them at a detailed level because the threat vectors are different from, the growth of ransomware, the growth of phishing through COVID, taking advantage of this remote topology has, gapped itself in terms of the ability for companies to protect themselves. And that's where I mentioned that more of this is going to be outsourced, which is great news for the channel in that it's now gone beyond the average company's ability to handle this on their own.
So if I'm an enterprise decision maker looking at all this and I'm going to outsource it because it's deeper than the level of the pool at which I can swim, what are some of the things that I should be looking for in vetting out the providers in terms of choosing my trusted advisor that's going to help me to make these kinds of decisions? What questions should I be looking for them to ask? What kind of expertise should I be expecting them to have? Am I looking at their partnerships as well as their internal people? How do I vet all that out?
Yeah, the first thing is we're learning that this single throat to choke or this single uh, trusted
Throat to choke is
advisor
fine. Yeah.
is going away. The fact of the matter is security is so complex. Even MSSPs with really deep skills up and down that 7-layer cake are finding that there's a group of providers that are providing, again, services and consulting. They're providing software and hardware. They're providing, different vectors of the solution. So in a security environment, it's more likely it's a teaming environment rather than one provider owning it from up, top to bottom as well. So the questions customers are asking around, the security operations center, which deep level, highly technical, scientific resources does that partner have access to? Because if they're rolling trucks and if they're running a managed service business or they're running a telco, sub-agent business, they obviously don't have the skills because security is changing on an hour by hour basis. And, the threats that are coming, there are deep think tanks and science that goes behind this. So I want to know who's in behind and I want to know the names. It's not a white labeled market anymore.
Mhm.
I want to know who you're connected to and who's watching your back across all 7 of these layers. Again, it's too much for a regional or a local provider to provide that backdrop. And the vendors that they're connected to within these 7 layers, need to work with each other as well as these, threat vectors change. So again, it's highly complex, and we are early in the topology to answer these questions. But I think customers are getting smarter in terms of how they look at a resume and the reference checks that they do and the questions that they're going to ask.
Okay, let's move on to a different area. You mentioned three things. Security was one of those. The another that you mentioned was automation. In terms of automation, we're very much accustomed to thinking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. Could you compare and contrast AI and ML with what you're thinking of in terms of automation in this context? And what are the implications for the enterprise decision maker?
Yeah, so AI and ML and predictive and prescriptive is a key part of automation. So COVID, for the first time in 100 years, represents a major human failure. We learned that in the average company, every process, every workflow, every piece of business logic is built with humans inside of it. That's just what we do. So we build ourselves as gates inside how a company operates. Well, when everyone went home and when the topology changed, most of these processes broke. So what companies are now looking at is across the different layers of their stack. For example, at the SaaS layer, what different pieces of workflow can I build in? Maybe using no code, low code environments that can remove humans from gates and start to make them more parallel to the process
Mhm.
and have the system of automation pick up more of the process. So the first inning of this we saw last year, which is really the growth of RPA, robotic process automation, as an industry. Big company like UiPath in that industry. There's Blue Prism. There's Automation Anywhere. There's a bunch of other companies. They're seeing a lot of M&A activity in the last 12 months in that world. I saw yesterday that Salesforce is out shopping for RPA. The fact is UiPath grew 5,614% last year. It represents the fastest growing software company to 100 million ever. It replaced Microsoft. Salesforce replaced Microsoft, then Slack replaced Salesforce, and now UiPath is the fastest growing company ever. So RPA is one of the building blocks to automation.
Is
So
that the first step, would you say?
yeah, so where do
Mhm.
partners go? And it has nothing to do with robots, even though it's robotic process automation. It is all software bots. It's no code, low code, and it's basically, any provider, any solution provider, MSP agent can start to build skills in this area, working across the lines of business, from finance to operations to marketing to sales to obviously back into IT, to start to build out some of these automated workflows. And this is where companies are really looking to invest. Number one, out of COVID.
And how would you characterize the opportunities versus the obstacles of this? To a lot of people, this is going to be a totally new approach to technology. So, what would you say would be the keys to building an effective strategy here?
The interesting thing is it's not the development of the past. You don't have to hire programmers and DevOps people. Your understanding of your client is the key first step. And understanding where your client could be more efficient, be more productive, can start to, and you probably see broken processes and workflows just in the IT, in the technology environment. But as you start to work with more of the business line of business leaders, they make 65% of cloud and modern technology project decisions. So as you're working more with them, the work is going to be around, a lot of it's going to be around automation. So building those muscles, building the skills around software bots, building the skills around using, for example, SaaS applications that they already have in house, like Salesforce and ServiceNow and Workday and Marketo and NetSuite. And I could rip through the top. There's 175,000 pieces of SaaS out there today. The fact of the matter is, most of them now have these no code, low code environments that in Salesforce, for example, you can create a lightning bolt or a lightning flow, which is a way that you can actually solve some of these issues in a drag and drop visual format. Once you do that, you can take that IP, you can go to GoDaddy, buy yourself a $5 URL, you can go and get a $5 logo from Fiverr, you can get a LinkedIn page set up over the weekend, and by Monday, you can sell this to other clients as IP. You can
Hmm.
go on the Salesforce App Exchange and be the one that solved for this level of automation. in this particular type of case. So this idea of becoming a vendor on the top of this opportunity is a huge and I think transformational shift for the channel on how to rethink the future of their businesses.
That's really interesting because, you would take it from the standpoint of solving an immediate problem, but then there are ways to productize it and move into different directions with it. I think that's going to be one of those things that we see evolve over the course of time and probably evolve quite rapidly.
Yeah. So if you want
Um,
to just a point on that, if you want to look at the future and succeeding in the digital future, because customers are moving much more digital through all parts of their journey, and in a majority of cases, they're getting to vendor selection without ever going through the traditional marketing and sales funnel. So in that world, you need to be found on marketplaces. You need to be
mhm.
found on Google. You need to be found in communities. You need to be found in a lot of places digitally. And we know because millions of companies are coming in to be technology providers. 81% of accountants, 78% of digital agencies, everyone is looking at technology services as a future part of their business. So we've got this world where every company in every industry is coming in. The ability to be found in that chaos is very, very difficult in services because everyone cuts and pastes everyone else's marketing language. So every website starts to look the same. Everyone claims they're all things to all people all the time. And the algorithms have a tough time determining one from the other on who to put on page one. In the product world, that's different. If you've solved the problem for a mid-sized clinic in upstate New York for bringing patients in the door from a marketing perspective, so you've solved the 5 vectors. When the next mid-sized clinic up in the Northeast comes into that search engine or comes into that marketplace, guess who gets on page one because you've productized the IP. So the future of being found over the next 10 years will be much more skewed towards being a product than being a service.
That's going to be an interesting transition to watch over time. So, the third thing on kind of the three legged stool that you outlined at the top of our discussion would be cloud acceleration. So, I think of cloud acceleration as kind of a managed service platform designed with, high speed switching and routing in order to deliver, video and latency sensitive content, kind of like a CDN rather, I'm sorry, or a content delivery network. So that makes perfect sense that this sort of capability would be important in this day and age. Where do you see this unfolding, and how is what you're looking at different from what I just kind of teed up a moment ago? And where do you see that one going?
Yeah, so I mean that's one important element. There's many important elements that build up the foundation of cloud acceleration. So first and foremost, we are in a multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment for the next decade. Many of the emerging technologies actually rely on local hardware. So if you truly want to do AI and automation at scale, much of that processing, the compute, the storage has to be local to make it real time. If you want to look at things like Internet of Things, if you want to look at blockchain, if you want to look at even into some of the quantum computing and other areas of the future, a lot of that compute is actually local. It can't rely on the latency of the cloud, even by milliseconds. It needs to be closer to the device, like an Internet of Things. The computing may have to be inside the plastic of the device. So, in this multi-cloud, hybrid cloud environment, there are huge stacks again of opportunity. So, infrastructure. I mentioned AWS and Azure and Google growing in the 40s when the rest of the world is shrinking by 16 to 17% right now. I look at the SaaS layer where there's 175,000 SaaS companies, but I mentioned a number of the larger ones. You can go track the top 50 or 75 on your stock ticker on the internet, and they're all growing by 30% quarter in, quarter out, year on year as growth. If you look at the platform layer, so there's a lot of software related opportunity in terms of not only provisioning and procuring, but managing and monitoring, and obviously automating, integrating, implementing, securing, making compliant, the whole governance element, the data elements. I mean, there's 17 tech services that come around the software side of cloud acceleration. Huge opportunities in the hardware side, the consulting side, and everything else. So that is where the battleground is going to be for the next decade. That is what COVID has accelerated. What we were predicting in 2023 is now happening now.
Okay, so with that in mind, looking at 2023 and now that happening now, crystal ball time, Jay, looking out on the horizon for 1 year, how do you believe that day will be different from today as relates to technology and business technology in particular?
Yeah, so the technology itself, I mean, we see a lot of from automation and cloud that I mentioned. The
Hmm.
business model of the average VAR or agent or MSP is really changing through COVID. You know, I published something last week based on McKinsey and Forrester research that the marketplace, e-commerce, web direct has grown more in the last 3 months than the last 10 years combined. So again, we were predicting 17% of all technology was going to be purchased in a marketplace e-commerce format in 2023 in the B2B world, and that's happening now. On the consumer side, it's 35%. Everyone is ordering every day from Amazon and getting their groceries delivered and getting restaurants delivered and curbside. And the world is changing. The future buyer in B2B or in technology looks a lot like a consumer. So the B2B
What's driving that surge though? I mean, is it that they need these things like right now so that, there's almost I don't want to call it a sense of desperation, but an immediacy basically, or is it something other than that?
let's go full circle to our security conversation at the beginning. So you're going to buy 7 layers of the cake rather than having the partner go and make those specific 7 vendor relationships, because today there's 2,000 security companies with a managed services partner program, and there's thousands more that are building one. So the landscape is large and growing. The fact is, what 7 layers that particular customer needs, again, based on their geography and their industry and their type of buyer, all those things, um, rather than having the partner go build all those relationships, get all those 7 things procured and provisioned, it's easier to use a marketplace to go and select all 7. If you have to add a user or take away a user, it's a single click across all 7. So this ability to procure and provision and measure and monitor and report all revolves around a marketplace when you're buying a stack. When you're a marketing buyer, many marketing buyers, for example, spend more on technology than the IT buyer in their company. It's another trend. They have 8,000 things on the MarTech stack. So when they go and choose their 7-layer cake, that's the average, again, 7 layers out of the 8,000, rather than having a partner go and build relationships with all 7 of those companies, become a partner, get the right product at the right price, and bring it all on a single bill, that's not the value proposition anymore. The marketplace offers up those 7 all in one click, and then the partner then can come in and provision it, implement, integrate, secure, make it compliant, do the data, do the continuity, do the 17 tech services that are actually highly valuable. In the cloud today, those come at 75% margins. So, the partner doesn't want to, spend a lot of time procuring at 20% front end margins when they could be spending that time, with triple or quadruple those margins. It's just a changing aspect. It's really kind of the sunset of resell as a component of your P&L.
That's interesting, and it's going to force the enterprise decision maker to look at technology acquisition in a completely different way, assuming they're not actually doing this already. And then they've got to look at things like, which marketplace they want to use and where the best options are and things along those lines too. So, very, very interesting perspectives. I'm brought back to the old Chinese adage of "May you live in interesting times." And for better or worse, we certainly live in interesting times. So, Jay McBain, principal analyst and of channels, partnerships, and ecosystems at Forrester Research. Thank you very much for being our guest here today. A lot of ground covered, a lot of great observations. We appreciate your time, my friend.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Avant Technology Insights, featuring information and opinions on how key technologies can be leveraged to solve business problems. Avant Technology Insights is a service of Avant Communications, a platform for IT decision-making. All opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host. For more information, please feel free to download our research reports and other resources at www.goavant.net. That's www.goavant, as in victory, ant.net. For Avant Research and Analytics, this is Ken Presti.